My name is Consuelo Paloma. I'm 84 years old, and I live in the historic center of Quito, Ecuador. For 58 years, I believed I knew the man I shared my life with, until that terrible day when everything changed forever. I was sitting in my leather armchair, the same one my mother left me, looking out at Garcia Moreno Street, where I've lived my entire adult life. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I had just finished preparing some empanadas with that special spice blend my grandmother taught me, the one with cumin and achiote that fills the whole house with the smell of home. My son Miguel had traveled for work, and I thought about taking some empanadas to his wife Patricia. She's always been so caring, always asking about Eduardo's health, always making sure we had everything we needed, or so I thought. When I arrived at their house, I used the spare key Patricia had given me for emergencies, but as I approached the front door, something made my blood freeze in my veins. There, perfectly aligned next to the entrance, were Eduardo's black leather shoes, the same ones I had given him for our 55th anniversary, the ones he polished every Sunday after Mass. My heart started beating like a war drum. "What is Eduardo doing here?" I whispered to myself. He was supposed to be at the medical center for his routine checkups. That's what he told me before leaving our house that morning, kissing my forehead like he had done for almost 6 decades. With trembling hands, I opened the door. The house was filled with a silence that felt heavy, dangerous. But then I heard something that shattered my world. Laughter. Eduardo's laughter. The same laughter that used to be only for me, the one I hadn't heard in years. I walked slowly down the hallway, my slippers making no sound on Patricia's ceramic tiles. Each step felt like walking toward my own execution. Through the crack in the living room door, I saw something that broke my soul into 1,000 pieces. My 82-year-old husband was embracing my daughter-in-law on her sofa. But this wasn't a consoling hug. This wasn't the embrace of a father-in-law comforting his son's wife. This was the embrace of two people who knew each other intimately, who shared secrets, who shared love. Patricia, the woman I had welcomed as a daughter, the woman I had cared for when she was sick, the woman who called me Mama Consuelo with such sweetness. She was kissing the man who had promised to love me until death do us part. Eduardo was caressing her hair, the way he used to caress mine when we were young. His wrinkled hands, the same hands that built our house, that consoled me when we lost our first baby, that held mine during every difficult moment of our long life together. Those hands were now touching our son's wife with a tenderness he hadn't shown me in years. I leaned against the hallway wall, covering my mouth to keep from screaming. Silent tears ran down my cheeks as I heard Patricia whisper to him, "Eduardo, my love, I can't stand pretending anymore when Consuelo comes to visit." My 84-year-old world, built on faith in God and trust in my family, crumbled in that instant. I left that house like a ghost, without making a sound, carrying a pain that weighed more than all my years combined. If you're going through something similar, if you feel like your world has also collapsed, this is your safe place. Here we share our stories without judgment, with love and understanding. Give this video a like if this story touches your heart. Subscribe to join me in this tale of pain, but also of hope. And tell me in the comments if you too have felt that life betrayed you when you least expected it. Because sometimes the greatest betrayals come from those we love most. And sometimes, at 84 years old, you discover that everything you thought you knew about your life was just an illusion. I never thought that at my age, I would have to learn the true meaning of betrayal. But there I was, watching my husband of 58 years caressing another woman with the same tenderness he once reserved only for me. My legs turned to jelly as I witnessed Eduardo stroking Patricia's face with those familiar fingers that once traced my own cheeks during our courtship in the mountains of Pichincha. She leaned into his touch like a flower turning toward the sun, and he looked at her with eyes that sparkled with a life I thought had died years ago. "Mi amor," she whispered, using the same words I had called him for decades. "When will we stop hiding? When will we be able to live freely?" Eduardo pulled her closer, and I saw him smile, really smile. for the first time in what felt like years. Soon, my princess. Very soon we won't have to pretend anymore. Those words hit me like a slap across my weathered face. Pretend? How long had they been pretending around me? How many family dinners had they sat at my table, looking into my eyes while planning this deception behind my back? I watched Patricia rest her head on Eduardo's shoulder, the same shoulder where I had cried when my mother died, where I had laughed during our children's first steps, where I had found comfort during every storm of our long marriage. Now it belonged to someone else. I feel so guilty sometimes, Patricia continued, her voice barely audible, especially when she brings us those empanadas and asks if we need anything. She's so kind, so trusting. Eduardo's response froze my blood. Don't feel guilty, mi cielo. Consuelo has had her time. She's lived her life. Now it's our turn to be happy. Her time. As if I were already dead and buried. As if my 84 years meant nothing more than an inconvenience standing in the way of their happiness. I pressed my back against the wall, feeling like the house itself might collapse on top of me. They began kissing again, and I couldn't watch anymore. Each kiss was a dagger in my heart, each caress a betrayal not just of our marriage, but of our entire family. This was the woman who had called me when Miguel was working late, asking for my secret to keeping a happy marriage. This was the woman who brought me flowers on Mother's Day and told me I was like a second mother to her. All lies. Beautiful, convincing lies. I crept backward toward the front door, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they would hear it. As I reached for the door handle, I heard Patricia say something that made me pause. What about Miguel? He adores his father. This will destroy him. Miguel will understand eventually, Eduardo replied without hesitation. He's a man. He knows that sometimes life takes unexpected turns. Unexpected turns? This wasn't an unexpected turn. This was a calculated betrayal of the deepest kind. They were talking about my son, Eduardo's son, as if his feelings were just another obstacle to overcome. I slipped out of that house like a shadow, closing the door so gently it made no sound. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold my purse. The empanadas I had brought with such love were still warm in my bag, a mockery of the maternal affection I had wasted on these two traitors. The walk back to my house felt endless. Every step on the cobblestones of our historic neighborhood seemed to echo with the sound of my world falling apart. Neighbors greeted me as they always did. Buenos dias, Doña Consuelo. But I could barely manage to smile and nod. If they only knew that behind my composed exterior, everything was crumbling. When I finally reached my front door, I realized that I was about to enter a house that would never feel the same again, because now I knew that the man who would return that evening was a stranger wearing my husband's face, in my leather armchair, surrounded by 84 years of memories. I couldn't pray for the first time in decades. The words that had always flowed so easily from my lips to God's ears were trapped somewhere between my broken heart and my shattered faith. I arrived home trembling like a leaf in an Andean storm. Eduardo wasn't there, of course. He was still at his medical appointment. I sat in my chair, the same one that had witnessed so many family conversations, so many moments of joy and sorrow, and for the first time in my long life, I felt completely alone. The family photographs on the wall stared at me like silent witnesses to my humiliation. There was Miguel and Patricia's wedding photo from 15 years ago, where Eduardo and I posed proudly as the perfect in-laws. There was our 50th anniversary picture, where we renewed our vows before the altar of San Francisco Church, promising once again to love each other until death. Everything was a lie. I began remembering signs I had ignored, moments that now burned in my memory with painful clarity. The phone calls Eduardo would cut short when I entered the room, claiming it was just business calls from his old carpentry clients. His medical appointments that had become so frequent, sometimes twice a week, when for years he had been healthy as a bull. The way he avoided my eyes during family dinners when Patricia was present. How he would suddenly become animated when she spoke, asking her questions about her day, her opinions, her dreams. Meanwhile, He barely listened when I talked about my embroidery projects or my conversations with the neighbors, and I, fool that I was, thought it was because we were getting old, that it was normal for marriages to lose their spark after so many years. I even thanked God for having such a caring daughter-in-law who always asked about Eduardo's health, who always seemed so concerned about his well-being. How blind I had been. How naive. I remembered last Christmas when Patricia insisted on sitting next to Eduardo at our dinner table. She kept serving him extra portions of my homemade horneado, laughing at his stories that I had heard 1,000 times before. At the time, I thought it was sweet how well they got along. Now I realized it was the performance of two people hiding their guilty secret, the cologne. God help me, the cologne. 3 months ago, Eduardo started wearing a new cologne, something fresh and expensive that I had never smelled on him before. When I asked about it, he said Patricia had recommended it, that she mentioned it would be good for his skin. I was touched that my daughter-in-law cared so much about my husband's appearance. Now I understood. She wasn't caring for my husband. She was dressing her lover. My chest felt tight, as if someone had wrapped steel bands around my ribs. Every breath was an effort. I looked at my hands, spotted with age and marked by decades of cooking, cleaning, and caring for this family. These hands that had kneaded bread for Eduardo's lunch every morning, that had sewn buttons on his shirts, that had caressed his forehead when he was sick. Had he thought about her hands while I touched him? Had he compared my aged skin to her younger flesh? Had every gesture of love I made become a burden he endured while dreaming of someone else? The afternoon sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across my living room. Soon Eduardo would return with his perfect performance, his rehearsed lies about doctors and tests, and clean bills of health. He would kiss my forehead, ask about my day, and sit at our dinner table as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, because now I knew that the man who would walk through that door was a stranger who had stolen my husband's face, my husband's voice, my husband's place in my bed. And I didn't know if I had the strength to pretend that I was still the same trusting wife who had kissed him goodbye that morning. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing that I had been living a lie for who knows how long, smiling and cooking, and loving a man who had already given his heart to someone else. That night, when Eduardo returned with his perfect performance, I understood that I had been living with a stranger for God knows how long. The man who walked through our door looked exactly like my husband, but everything about him felt foreign and dangerous. Mi amor, he said, kissing my forehead with the same tenderness he had always shown me. The medical exams went well. The doctor says I'm strong for my age. These old bones still have some bite left in them. I wanted to scream, "I know where you were! I know what you were doing!" But the words stuck in my throat like thorns. Instead, I managed to whisper, "That's good, Eduardo. That's very good." He smiled at me, that same smile that had won my heart 60 years ago in the plaza of our neighborhood. But now it felt like a mask hiding something rotten underneath. How easily the lies rolled off his tongue. How naturally he constructed this false reality while destroying mine piece by piece. During dinner, I watched him as if he were a specimen under glass. This man who knew every wrinkle on my body, who knew I liked chamomile tea before bed, who had held my hand through 3 miscarriages and the deaths of both our parents. This same man was lying to me while looking directly into my eyes. "How was your afternoon, Consuelo?" he asked while cutting his meat, the same meat I had seasoned with love and prepared with these hands that had served him for 58 years. The irony was unbearable. He was asking about my afternoon, the afternoon when I discovered his betrayal, when I watched him caress another woman in ways he hadn't touched me in years. I could tell him everything right there, throw it all in his face, watch his mask crumble. Instead, I heard myself say, "Quiet, Eduardo. I did some embroidery." He nodded, satisfied with my lie, never suspecting that I had learned from the master himself how to deceive. But unlike him, my lies tasted like poison in my mouth. That night, for the first time in 58 years, I pretended to be asleep when he came to bed. I lay there rigid as a corpse, feeling the mattress dip under his weight, listening to his breathing gradually slow into the peaceful rhythm of someone with a clear conscience. But I knew better now. I knew that behind his closed eyelids, he might be dreaming of Patricia. I wondered how many nights he had lain beside me, thinking of her touch, her voice, her younger body. How many times had he made love to me while imagining it was her? The thought made me sick to my stomach. I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster that we had never bothered to fix. Our bedroom, once a sanctuary of love and intimacy, now felt like a prison where I was trapped with my betrayer. The man next to me, this stranger wearing Eduardo's face, breathed so peacefully while my world burned around us. Around 3 in the morning, he turned in his sleep and threw his arm across my waist, the same gesture he had made thousands of times before. But now his touch felt like fire against my skin. I wanted to push him away, to scream, to run from this bed that had become a monument to deception. Instead, I lay there motionless, tears sliding silently down my cheeks onto the pillow that had absorbed so many tears throughout our marriage. Tears of joy when our children were born, tears of sorrow when we lost loved ones, tears of gratitude for the life we had built together. Now it was absorbing tears of betrayal, and I wondered if this pillow would ever be dry again. As dawn approached, I realized that this was my new reality, sharing a home with someone who had become my enemy, someone who stole my trust, my dignity, and my faith in love itself. And the most terrifying part was that I didn't know how long I could continue this charade before it destroyed what was left of my sanity. The call from my son Miguel during his work trip broke my heart into even smaller pieces than I thought possible. I couldn't carry this secret alone anymore. It was killing me from the inside. But I also couldn't destroy my son's world over the phone while he was so far from home. The next morning, while Eduardo went out to buy the newspaper, another lie that I now recognized, the phone rang. The sound pierced through the silence of my kitchen where I sat drinking my morning agua panela, the same sweet drink my mother used to prepare when I was troubled as a child. "Mama!" Miguel's voice came through crackling with distance. He was calling from Guayaquil, where his company had sent him for 2 weeks. "I've been trying to reach Patricia since yesterday, but she's not answering her phone. Is everything okay? Have you heard from her?" My son's worried voice was like a knife twisting in my chest. Here was my boy, working so hard to provide for his family, worried about his wife who was probably at that very moment planning her future with his own father. The innocence in his voice, the genuine concern, it made me want to weep. She's probably just busy, mijo," I managed to say, my voice barely steady. "You know how women are with their household chores." But even as I said it, I knew it was a pathetic lie. Patricia wasn't busy with household chores. She was busy destroying our family. "It's strange, Mama. She always answers when I call, especially when I'm traveling. We talk every night before I go to sleep. Yesterday, nothing. Today, nothing. I'm starting to worry that something happened to her. Oh, something had happened to her all right. She had happened to my husband. Or maybe my husband had happened to her. Either way, my son's marriage was as dead as mine, only he didn't know it yet. Maybe she went to visit her sister in Ambato," I suggested weakly, grasping for any explanation that wouldn't reveal the horrible truth. "You know how the phone service is in the mountains. I already called her sister. Patricia isn't there." Miguel's voice carried a note of panic now. "Mama, could you maybe go check on her? I know you have the spare key. I would feel so much better knowing she's safe." Safe. If only he knew that his wife was perfectly safe. Safe in the arms of his father, planning a future that would shatter everything Miguel believed about his family. "Of course, mijo. I'll go check on her this afternoon. Thank you, Mama. You're an angel. I don't know what I'd do without you." An angel. If only he knew that his angel had already discovered his wife's infidelity and was protecting him from a truth that would destroy him. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my kitchen staring at the wall where Miguel's childhood drawings still hung, faded with age, but precious to my heart. Pictures of our family drawn in crayon by innocent hands. Stick figures of Mama, Papa, Grandpa, and Grandma, all smiling under a yellow sun. How do you tell a grown man that his father is sleeping with his wife? How do you explain that the family he drew as a child, the family he still believes in, is nothing but a lie held together by deception and betrayal? When Eduardo returned with his newspaper, probably after making plans with Patricia, he seemed unusually cheerful. He was humming an old bolero, something romantic that we used to dance to in our youth. The irony was nauseating. Patricia called while you were out. I lied smoothly, learning to match his deception with my own. She said she's fine, just been busy cleaning the house thoroughly. You know how she is about keeping everything perfect. Eduardo's face relaxed, and I saw relief in his eyes. Relief that their secret was still safe, that I remained the blind old woman who suspected nothing. That's good, he said, settling into his chair with his coffee. Miguel worries too much about that girl. She can take care of herself. Oh, yes, she could take care of herself all right. She was taking care of herself by stealing my husband, my security, my faith in love itself. She was taking very good care of herself while my world crumbled around me. The worst part was watching Eduardo's face as he mentioned Patricia. There was a softness there, a tenderness in his expression that I hadn't seen in years. He loved her. This wasn't just an affair or a moment of weakness. My husband of 58 years was genuinely in love with our son's wife, and I was trapped in the middle, protecting everyone from a truth that would eventually destroy us all. When I told my comadre Rosa what I had seen, I discovered that I wasn't the only one who had noticed something strange. Sometimes the people closest to us see what we refuse to acknowledge, even when it's happening right under our noses. I couldn't bear the weight of this secret any longer. It was eating me alive from the inside, like a cancer that grows in darkness and silence. That Thursday afternoon, I walked the 6 blocks to Rosa's small house near the Basilica, my feet heavy with the burden I was carrying. Rosa and I have been friends for 47 years. We met when our children were babies, bonding over sleepless nights and the challenges of raising families in a neighborhood that was changing around us. She's the only person in this world who knows all my secrets. Until now, this had been the darkest one. We sat in her tiny kitchen, drinking té de hierba luisa, while rain drummed against her tin roof. The sound reminded me of all the afternoons we had spent together, sharing gossip, worries, and dreams. But today felt different. Today I was about to share something that would change how she looked at my family forever. Rosa, I began, my voice barely above a whisper, I need to tell you something terrible. Her weathered hands stopped stirring her tea. In her eyes, I saw the same concern that had been there when I told her about my miscarriages, when my mother died, when Miguel's first marriage failed. Rosa had always been my safe harbor in every storm. I told her everything, finding the shoes, witnessing the embrace, hearing their conversation. With each word, I watched Rosa's face change from surprise to shock to something that looked almost like relief. Consuelo, mi niña, she said finally, reaching across the small table to take my hands. I suspected something was wrong. What do you mean you suspected? Rosa sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that carries years of withheld secrets. 3 months ago, I saw them together at the Mercado Central. They were buying fruit, and they were too comfortable with each other. Patricia was choosing mangoes, and Eduardo was standing very close behind her, his hand on her lower back. When she laughed at something he said, it wasn't the laugh of a daughter-in-law. It was the laugh of a woman in love. My stomach turned to ice. 3 months ago. This had been going on for at least 3 months, maybe longer. I told myself I was imagining things, Rosa continued. I thought maybe they were just close, you know. Some families are more affectionate than others. But it bothered me enough that I mentioned it to my daughter Carmen, and she said I was being a gossip. What else did you see? Rosa hesitated, and I knew there was more. 2 weeks ago, I saw them coming out of the Banco Pichincha together. Eduardo was carrying papers in his hand, and Patricia looked nervous. When they spotted me across the street, they separated quickly, like teenagers caught doing something forbidden. The bank. My mind raced. What business could they have at the bank together? What papers was Eduardo carrying? A cold dread settled in my chest as I realized this betrayal might go deeper than just emotional infidelity. Rosa, why didn't you tell me? My friend's eyes filled with tears. Because I hoped I was wrong. Because I didn't want to be the messenger who destroyed your family. Because at our age, Consuelo, we've learned that sometimes the truth causes more pain than the lie. But now I knew the truth was already causing pain. My pain, carried in secret, while everyone around me lived their lives pretending everything was normal. How many other people in our neighborhood had noticed? How many pitying looks had I missed? Was I the last person in Quito to discover my own husband's infidelity? There's something else, Rosa said quietly. Last Sunday after Mass, I overheard Señora Martinez telling her sister that she had seen Eduardo and Patricia having lunch at that new restaurant near El Panecillo. She said they looked like newlyweds. Newlyweds. While I sat at home preparing his favorite sancocho, thinking my husband was probably taking a walk to ease his arthritis, he was playing newlywed with our son's wife. The humiliation was now a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Not only had my husband and daughter-in-law betrayed me, but apparently half the neighborhood knew about it, while I remained blissfully ignorant, the foolish old woman whose family was falling apart behind her back. Rosa squeezed my hands tighter. What are you going to do, mi niña? For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized I had to make a choice. I could continue pretending I knew nothing, living this lie until it killed me, or I could find the courage to confront the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The rain outside grew heavier, and I knew that when it stopped, I would have to step back into a world where nothing would ever be the same again. Among the papers in our house, I discovered that the betrayal wasn't just of the heart, but also of our money, the savings of a lifetime that Eduardo had been secretly giving to Patricia, while I counted every centavo to make our pensions stretch through each month. Rosa's advice echoed in my mind as I returned home that evening. Consuelo, if they're planning something more than just romance, you need to protect yourself. Check your papers, check your accounts. Love makes people do crazy things, but money makes them do evil things. That afternoon, while Eduardo took his usual siesta, I did something I had never done in 58 years of marriage. I went through his personal papers. My hands shook as I opened the wooden box where he kept our important documents, the same box his father had given him when we got married. What I found there stole the breath from my lungs. Bank statements showing transfers to Patricia Jimenez, our daughter-in-law's maiden name, for amounts that made my head spin. $2,000 in January, $1,500 in February, $3,000 in March. Money taken from our savings account, the account we had built centavo by centavo throughout our entire working lives. I sat on our bed, staring at these papers that proved my husband had been systematically robbing our future to finance his affair, while I worried about whether we could afford my blood pressure medication, while I mended our old clothes instead of buying new ones, while I watered down the soup to make it last longer. Eduardo was giving thousands of dollars to his lover, but the bank statements were just the beginning of my discoveries. Hidden beneath them were receipts from Hotel Quito Real, a place on the outskirts of the city that I had driven past countless times, without ever imagining my husband would set foot there. The dates on these receipts matched exactly with his supposed medical appointments over the past 4 months. February 14th, Valentine's Day. While I had prepared his favorite breakfast and kissed him goodbye for his cardiology consultation, he had spent the day in a hotel room with Patricia. March 19th, our wedding anniversary. I had spent that entire day cooking his favorite meal, setting the table with our good china, waiting for him to return from his blood tests so we could celebrate 58 years together. He never came home until 10 at night, claiming the clinic had been very busy. Now I knew where he had really been. My hands trembled as I reached for the last document in the box, a letter written in Eduardo's shaky handwriting, apparently started but never finished. Reading it felt like swallowing glass, but I couldn't stop myself. My beloved Patricia, I know this situation is difficult for both of us, But I want you to know that every day I love you more deeply. The money I've been giving you is just the beginning. Soon we won't have to hide anymore. Consuelo's health is becoming more fragile each day, and at her age, the letter ended there. But I understood perfectly what he meant to write. My husband wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning for my death, counting on my fragile health to solve his problem. At 84 years old, I had thought I was beyond shock, beyond the capacity for my heart to break any further. I was wrong. I sat in that bedroom where we had shared so many intimate moments, where our children had been conceived, where we had whispered our dreams and fears to each other in the darkness. Now it felt like a mausoleum of lies. Eduardo wasn't just cheating on me with Patricia. He was planning our future as if I was already dead and buried. The money he was giving her wasn't just for their affair. It was an investment in the life they planned to build together once I was out of the way. The cruelest part was realizing that while I worried about having enough money for groceries, while I saved every peso thinking about our old age together, my husband was spending our life savings on hotel rooms and gifts for another woman. I looked at my reflection in our old mirror, at this 84-year-old face marked by years of love and sacrifice, and for the first time, I saw what Eduardo apparently saw: an obstacle, an inconvenience, something to be endured until nature took its course. That afternoon, as thunder rumbled over the Andes and rain began to fall again, I realized that my marriage hadn't just ended. It had been murdered, slowly and deliberately, by the very person I had trusted most in this world. At 84 years old, I became a detective of my own life, and what I found gave me a strength I didn't know I still possessed. Sometimes, when everything is taken from you, you discover that you still have the most important thing of all: your dignity. I couldn't continue pretending. The evidence was overwhelming, the betrayal complete, and my heart had reached its breaking point. The next day, when Eduardo announced another medical appointment, I made a decision that terrified and liberated me at the same time. I was going to follow him. At my age, with my arthritic hands and my tired legs, I felt like a character from one of those detective stories my granddaughter reads. But this wasn't fiction. This was my life being destroyed by the two people I had loved and trusted most. I waited 15 minutes after Eduardo left, then took the bus that follows the same route toward Patricia's neighborhood. My heart pounded with each stop, each familiar street that brought me closer to the truth I dreaded but needed to witness. When I arrived at Patricia's house, I saw Eduardo's bicycle parked casually in the front yard, as if it belonged there. He wasn't trying to hide anymore, or maybe they thought I was too old and blind to notice. I waited across the street for an hour, watching their windows, seeing shadows move inside what had once been my son's happy home. Finally, I gathered every ounce of courage in my 84-year-old body and walked to the front door. I didn't use the spare key this time. I knocked. Patricia opened the door wearing only a bathrobe, her hair wet from the shower. When she saw me, her face went white as the sheets I had helped her fold so many times during family visits. "Suegra," she stammered, pulling the robe tighter around herself. I didn't know you were coming." "Of course you didn't know," I said with a calmness that surprised even me. "Because Eduardo is supposed to be at the doctor, isn't he?" Behind her, I heard footsteps. And then Eduardo appeared, wearing only his underwear and one of Miguel's old shirts. My husband of 58 years stood there like a child caught stealing candy, his face a mixture of shame and defiance. "Consuelo, I can explain." "No," I interrupted, and my voice carried a strength I had forgotten I possessed. "You cannot explain 58 years of marriage thrown in the trash. You cannot explain how you betrayed your own son. You cannot explain the money you've stolen from our savings to pay for your hotel rooms. There is no explanation for this, Eduardo. There are only consequences." Patricia began to cry, those pretty tears that had probably worked on men all her life. "Please, Mama Consuelo, it just happened. We didn't plan it. We tried to fight it." "Don't you dare call me Mama," I said, each word like ice. "You lost that right when you decided to sleep with my husband. And don't lie to me about it just happening." I found the hotel receipts dating back 4 months. I found the bank transfers. I found Eduardo's love letter talking about my health being fragile. Eduardo's face crumpled. He knew I had discovered everything. Patricia, I continued, looking directly at this woman who had called me abuela and kissed my cheek at every family gathering. You are young enough to be his granddaughter. When you're my age, if you live that long, he'll be dead 20 years. Is a few years with an old man worth destroying your marriage, your family, your soul? She couldn't answer. She could only sob into her hands. And you, I turned to Eduardo, this stranger wearing my husband's face. You told her that I was fragile, that my time was almost over. You've been planning your future with her as if I was already in my grave. Well, let me tell you something. I may be 84, but I'm stronger than you think. Strong enough to survive this betrayal. Strong enough to rebuild my life without you. Eduardo tried to reach for me. Consuelo, mi amor, please. Don't touch me. I stepped back. Your hands have touched her. They're not clean anymore. For a moment, we all stood there in the doorway of what had been my son's home. Now the scene of our family's destruction. I could hear the neighbors' televisions, children playing in the street, life continuing normally just meters away from this catastrophe. I want you out of my house by tomorrow night, I told Eduardo. Take whatever you need, but leave your keys. That house was built with my sweat and sacrifice too, and I won't let you bring your shame under its roof. As I turned to leave, I heard Patricia whisper, "What about Miguel?" I stopped and looked back at both of them. Miguel is my son, and I will tell him the truth when he returns. He deserves to know what kind of people he trusted with his love. I walked away from that house with my head high, leaving behind two people who had chosen their momentary pleasure over decades of family bonds. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. In the most painful conversation of my life, I also found the most unexpected liberation. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to discover what you truly need, and what I needed was to stop living a lie. What followed that confrontation was 3 hours of the most brutal honesty I had ever experienced. Patricia sobbed uncontrollably, begging for forgiveness, swearing that it had started innocently when Eduardo comforted her during a fight with Miguel 2 years ago. 2 years, not 4 months like the hotel receipts suggested. 2 years of deception, 2 years of lies, 2 years of them laughing at my blindness during family dinners and holiday celebrations. It began when Miguel was working those long hours at the construction company. Patricia explained through her tears. I felt so lonely, so abandoned. Eduardo would come to check on me, bring me groceries, fix things around the house. He was so kind, so attentive. I wanted to laugh at the bitter irony. While my son worked himself to exhaustion to provide for his wife, his father was seducing her with the same charm that had won my heart 6 decades earlier. At first it was just conversations, she continued. He would tell me stories about his youth, about traveling through Ecuador when he was young. He made me feel special, like I mattered. And when did conversations become adultery? I asked, my voice cutting through her excuses like a blade. She couldn't answer. Eduardo, sitting on the sofa where I had first discovered them, finally spoke. Consuelo, I know you won't understand this, but Patricia makes me feel alive again. With you, I feel like an old man waiting for death. With her, I remember what it's like to have passion, to have dreams. His words hit me like physical blows. After 58 years of marriage, this was how he saw me, as a burden, as a reminder of mortality, as something to be endured rather than cherished. So you decided to steal our life savings to impress her? I demanded. You decided to plan my future, as if I was already dead. Eduardo's face crumpled. I wasn't planning your death, Consuelo. I was planning a new life. I thought maybe we could separate quietly. Maybe you could go live with Carmen in Cuenca. You thought you could ship me off to live with my daughter like an unwanted piece of furniture while you played house with my son's wife? The room fell silent except for Patricia's sobbing. I looked at these two people who had destroyed my world, And suddenly I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. They looked pathetic, desperate, like children who had broken something precious and didn't know how to fix it. "Do you love her?" I asked Eduardo directly. He looked at Patricia, then back at me. "Yes. And you?" I asked Patricia. "Do you love him, or do you love the security he represents? The money he's been giving you, the attention from someone who worships you?" Patricia's sobs grew louder, but she didn't answer. And in her silence, I found my answer. I stood up from the chair where this nightmare had begun. "I'm going home now. Eduardo, you have until tomorrow night to remove your belongings from our house. I'll be staying at Rosa's tonight so you can pack without having to face me again." "Consuelo, please." Eduardo stood up, reaching for me one last time. "We're old. Can we find a way to work through this?" I looked at this man who had shared my bed for 58 years, who had fathered my children, who had promised before God to love me until death. Now he was asking me to work through his affair with our son's wife, as if it was a minor disagreement about household expenses. "Eduardo, I'm 84 years old, but I'm not dead yet, and I refuse to spend whatever years I have left pretending that this betrayal never happened. You made your choice. Now live with it." As I walked to the door, I heard Patricia call out, "What about Miguel when he comes back from his trip?" I paused at the threshold. "Miguel is my son, and he deserves to know the truth about both of you. He deserves the chance to find a woman who will be faithful to him, and a father who won't betray him." That night at Rosa's house, I prayed for the first time since discovering the affair, but I didn't pray for my marriage to be saved, or for Eduardo to come to his senses, or for this nightmare to be just a bad dream. I prayed for strength. I prayed for wisdom. And for the first time in my life, I prayed for myself, for the courage to build a new life at 84 years old, for the faith to believe that God still had plans for me, for the hope that my story wasn't ending but beginning a new chapter. Outside Rosa's window, the lights of Quito twinkled like stars, and I realized that somewhere in that vast city was a future I had never imagined, a future where I was no longer Eduardo's wife, but simply Consuelo Paloma, a woman with her own dreams, her own choices, her own life to live. 6 months later, I can say that at 84 years old, I was reborn, and my new life is more beautiful than I ever imagined. Sometimes God closes a door so violently that we think our world has ended, only to discover that he was making room for windows we never knew existed. Eduardo no longer lives in our house, my house now. My children supported me when I told them the whole truth, especially Miguel, who divorced Patricia after discovering that their betrayal had lasted 2 years, not the innocent mistake she claimed it to be. The legal proceedings were swift. With the help of a lawyer my daughter Carmen recommended, I recovered most of our savings that Eduardo had transferred to Patricia. Apparently the fool hadn't had enough time to move everything before I discovered his scheme. With that money and the sale of some properties we owned together, I bought a smaller apartment near La Mariscal, full of light and close to everything I need. At 84 years old, I'm learning to live alone for the first time in my life. Not lonely, alone. There's a difference that I never understood before. I have a new routine that belongs completely to me. Tuesday mornings, I take watercolor painting classes at the community center, something I always wanted to do but never had time for when I was busy taking care of everyone else. Thursday evenings, I attend my prayer group at the church, where I've met other women who understand that life doesn't end at 80. Weekends are for my grandchildren, who visit me in my bright apartment and help me arrange the plants on my balcony. They tell me I seem different now, happier, more energetic. My granddaughter Sofia says I laugh more than I used to. Sometimes I see Eduardo and Patricia at the Mercado Central. They live together now in a small rented house near the bus terminal, all they could afford after Eduardo lost his pension rights in our divorce. He looks older, smaller, as if carrying the weight of guilt has shrunk him. She avoids my eyes when our paths cross, but I walk with my head held high, not out of spite, but out of genuine peace. Last month, Miguel brought his new girlfriend to meet me, a lovely woman named Carmen who works as a nurse and treats my son with the respect and love he deserves. watching them together. Seeing the light return to my son's eyes, I realized that sometimes destruction creates space for something better to grow. My other children visit more often now. They tell me they worried for years about how quiet and sad I had become during those final years with Eduardo, but they didn't know how to help. Now they see their mother again, not just Eduardo's wife, but Consuelo Paloma, a woman with opinions, dreams, and plans of her own. I've even started traveling. Last month I took a bus to Baños with my painting class, and we spent 3 days capturing the waterfalls and mountains on canvas. I hadn't left Quito in over 10 years during my marriage. Eduardo always said traveling was too expensive, too tiring for people our age. Now I understand he didn't want to travel with me because I reminded him of everything he wanted to escape. The hardest part of this journey wasn't the betrayal itself. It was learning to forgive myself for staying blind for so long, for accepting crumbs of affection when I deserved a feast of love, for believing that growing old meant growing invisible. At 84, I've discovered that age doesn't diminish us. Settling for less than we deserve diminishes us. I still pray every evening, but my prayers have changed. I thank God for this late blooming freedom, for the strength to choose dignity over comfort, for the courage to start over when most people think life is ending. My name is Consuelo Paloma Jimenez. I am 84 years old. I live in a beautiful apartment in Quito where every corner belongs to me. And this is my story of betrayal, heartbreak, and most importantly, rebirth. If you're listening to this and you feel trapped in a life that no longer serves you, remember, it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to demand the love and respect you deserve. It's never too late to discover who you are when you're not defined by someone else's expectations. God has plans for each of us that extend far beyond the roles others assign to us. At 84, I finally learned that my worth was never dependent on being Eduardo's wife, or Miguel's mother, or anyone's anything. My worth comes from being Consuelo, and that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything.